The seven trumpets of Revelation chapters 8 and 9 are intended to break the strongholds that Satan will have erected over the tribulation world to clear the path to Jesus' conquest of the earth. But what are these seven trumpets, and how do the events that they usher in break those strongholds? We'll talk about it on this week's episode of Revelation Unveiled on Faith by Reason. Welcome to Faith by Reason. The website behind it all is faithbyreason.net. There you will find hundreds of hours of study material, blogs, podcasts, and video. And we are continuing our study of the book of Revelation, and we are on chapters 8 and 9, the seven trumpets. And as I said during the last episode, and I've been making it pretty clear the last few months, is that I do not believe that these trumpets are direct judgments from God onto a sinful world, just as I don't believe the six seals were God's judgments. I think his judgments don't happen until the bowls of wrath, which we'll talk about down the road quite a bit. But these trumpets, actually, although they will be cataclysmic and they are from God, unlike the four horsemen of the apocalypse, who I believe are from Satan, these are from God, but their intention is not pure judgment. Their intention is to bring down satanic strongholds. And I talked about that last week. You can go back to last week's episode and get all of that information. So what's happening now? Basically, spiritually speaking, these strongholds, and I also want to talk about what these strongholds are. Strongholds are those false negative belief systems that allow Satan to have power over our lives. And during the time of the tribulation, after the false apocalypse, the world will have definitively chosen Satan and his Antichrist as their God and master by worshiping the Antichrist. So Satan will have convinced the world that he and his fallen angels and his Antichrist are the omnipotent source of prosperity, provision, life, death, and overall control, both in the physical and spiritual realms. They are going to set themselves up as the true gods, and they will portray the God of the Bible, Jehovah, and Jesus as false gods who are actually the enemies. And so that's where people are going to be. And if you want more on that, just go to the whole series on the false apocalypse, which I covered for several episodes on Revelation chapter 6. So with the world having made their definitive choice, with them choosing Satan, it's time for God to bring things to a close. And the first thing he's going to do is reclaim the earth. We talked about it again last week, that Jesus has legal ownership over the earth. He hasn't claimed it yet. And now God is going to start the process of closing escrow on Jesus' property by kicking out the squatters. And that's what's going on here. And we saw how God, he modeled it in the past through the taking of the land of Canaan in the book of Joshua. So again, I went over that last week. Please check that out. And so in this episode, we are going to go through the first four of the trumpet blasts, and we will see the events they usher in, and then I will tell you how each of these blasts affect the physical world and how they bring down the spiritual strongholds. So let's just start by diving in. Let's just read the first several verses of Revelation chapter 8 with the first four trumpet blasts. And starting with verse 1. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. And I looked and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpets of the three angels who are about to sound. Okay, there is a tremendous amount of things happening here in this chapter, just amazing. And I'm going to get through it as best I can in the time we have a lot of amazing stuff happening here. So before we break down these verses, though, I want to talk about interpretation. Because as with everything else in the Bible, different people have different views of it. I have mine and others have theirs, and I want to be fair enough to present how other people see them and why I disagree, where I do disagree. So basically, these trumpets, they're going to usher in some of the worst devastation the world has ever seen. I mean, the impact is almost unimaginable, and we'll talk about that as we go through the different the effects. And so much so that many people, including many Bible scholars and commentators, try to dismiss or allegorize the events in order to make them seem less destructive and make themselves feel more comfortable. However, if it is not already clear, I take Revelation and frankly the entire Bible seriously. I don't like to say literally because people come up with some crazy stuff. So, you take the Bible literally, then you must believe that God is a chicken because he says that he longs to take Israel under his wings like a chicken gathers her chicks. So don't be silly. That's of course symbolic. So I take the Bible seriously, and unless the Bible gives a clear linguistic indication that a passage is allegorical, symbolic, or rhetorical, or using poetic license, then I take it literally. And I see no such indications in Revelation 8 and 9, so I take these chapters as literally as I can based on what's physically and spiritually happening. And you're welcome to disagree, but that's my point of view. And these things are happening in the physical realm, but again, they affect the spiritual realm. And some Bible commentators, many of whom I respect greatly, tend to, I guess I would say, despiritualize these things. They want to try to come up with an explanation that is not supernatural or less supernatural than what the Bible actually says, which is kind of ironic because these are the same people, again, good Bible scholars who believe in the supernatural to a degree. I mean, they believe in an invisible God that none of us have ever seen. They believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he was miraculously born. They believe that he walked on water and turned a few fishes and loaves into a meal that could feed thousands. They believe he walked on water. They believe he rose from the dead on the third day. And then they kind of stop. They kind of believe, okay, well, that was it. That was the end of the miracles. The disciples did a few miracles as well, but that was it. And all miracles stopped in the first century, and everything else has a naturalistic explanation. And they try to do that with these seven trumpets, and they'll say, well, yeah, this is just what John saw, but what he really means is this. What they do is they'll modernize it and say that John, they have this false impression that the Apostle John, or basically anyone born, several hundred or a couple thousand years ago, are just stupid. They're just primitive rubes who didn't know anything, and they were just in awe of our modern technology. So they look at our vehicles and our technology, and they just kind of put it into spiritualized forms. But this, first of all, this is not true. John and all the disciples were not idiots. They were literate men. They were learned. They could read and write and reason. They were, especially people like Paul, were absolutely brilliant. And John was an intelligent person. He knew if he didn't use a simile, if he didn't say something was like something, then he meant it was exactly what he stated it was. He wasn't just in awe. And we'll see that. I'll give examples of that as we go through it. But one of the problems with this modernization is that it limits the timing of these events in Revelation to our age. Because if John sees an airplane and he thinks it's a great bird, then you're saying that the Revelation, these events, the tribulation, could only happen during our period of time where we have airplanes. And so again, I don't like that. And I think that it does a disservice to the text and to the writer. Another thing that many Bible teachers do, and secular people too, is they allegorize this to the point where nothing's really happening. They make this like it's not really, these aren't really devastating things happening to the earth. It's all allegory. It's all God talking about something else. He's using symbols. He doesn't mean that there's real fire. He means, the fire of the gospel or something else that just takes away from the devastation. And the reason they do that, the reason many of them do it, is because they want to soften God. They don't like the idea of, they have this image that, God is loving, which he is, but they have the idea that loving means nice. God is loving, so God must be nice. Jesus is loving, so Jesus must be nice. And since it says you're defining them as a nice person would never do anything bad and harsh. So our loving God would never burn up the trees and cause hail and fire to rain down and turn oceans to blood. He would never do that. So it must be something else. That's not possible. But again, you are reading your interpretation of God into the Bible. That's called eisegesis, as opposed to exegesis, where you read the Bible and then take what the Bible says and apply it to the world. Eisegesis is where you take what you already believe about God in the Bible and read that into the Bible. So you change the Bible to fit your beliefs instead of allowing the Bible to change your beliefs. So, those are a couple ways. And the last thing people do in interpreting these events is they regionalize it. And by that, I mean they say that these events are only happening in the Middle East, which is where most of the Bible takes place, in Israel and Egypt and Babylon and Syria and places like that. So, and that would be the only world that John knew. So when John says these things affect the world, he just meant the Middle East, the Mediterranean area, because that was the world at that time. And I guess I can theoretically understand that because, the Bible is focused on that particular region. However, the language makes it clear that this affects the entire earth. And this would not be much of a judgment, if you want to call it that, or it would not be much of an escrow closing on the entire world if it only affected, an area that's maybe, 1/10 of the size of the world. How would that convince anyone living here in the United States if you say, oh, look at all those things happening over in Israel. Oh, that's too bad for them. We're going to keep living our lives over here. No, I think these things are worldwide, so I don't think they're just regional. All right, so with that said, and now that we're 12 minutes in, let's start breaking down these verses. This is probably going to be a longer episode, so brace yourself. Break it up into a couple of listenings or viewings if you have to. So here we go with verse 1. And when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So a couple things. First of all, we're still in the seals technically. We talked about this a couple episodes ago where there's a pattern where you have, especially with the seals and the bowls and the trumpets, where you have 6 of them happen concurrently, then there's a break, and then the 7th. So the break was chapter 7, which we talked about a couple episodes ago, which obviously happened between chapters 6 and 8. And now the 7th seal is finally opened, and the 7th seal is, of course, ushering in these 7 trumpets, which will, of course, usher in the 7 bowls. So this 7th seal, and remember, or ushers us all in. And remember that this is the 7th seal scroll. So now with the 7th seal broken, the scroll can be opened. And remember that scroll, that 7th seal scroll that the Lamb had in Revelation chapter 5 is a title deed to the earth. And this is, again, fits into what we're saying, or what I've been purporting, which is that this is an escrow closing. This is Jesus taking possession of what is his. He opened the title deed to the earth. Now it's time to take it. So it's time to conquer the earth, to take what's his. And that's another reason that I believe that these trumpets are part and parcel of taking back the earth. And there was silence in heaven for half an hour. And as I said before, other Bible commentators, not me, other Bible commentators say that silence in heaven for half an hour is proof that there are no women in heaven. Now, I don't believe that, but this other Bible commentator said that. Also, I would say that silence in heaven for half an hour may also be proof that there are no lawyers in heaven, because I've never heard a lawyer who can actually be silent for that long. But anyway, I think in all seriousness, this silence, I think, mirrors the silence that the Israelites conducted themselves in silence as they marched around the city of Jericho to take down the stronghold. We talked about that in the last episode. Verse 2, and I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. So who are these angels? Well, the short answer is the Bible doesn't say for sure. I think there's reason to believe the first 4 might be the same 4 that we saw in the last chapter, in chapter 7, who were standing on the 4 quadrants, not corners, quadrants of the earth, and they were told not to harm the earth or the sea or the trees until the 144,000 are sealed. And so now that they are sealed, you will find that these first 4 trumpets actually do harm the earth and the sea and so forth and so on. So these may be the same angels, maybe not. It doesn't really matter. The Bible intentionally does not name angels. I think there's only a couple of them that are named Gabriel and Michael. You could argue that Lucifer is named, but actually Lucifer is not a proper name. It's a title. So, and why does God not name angels? Because he knows how we are. He knows that we'd probably start worshiping them. In fact, people already worship them. Even the two that are named, like for example, Michael the archangel, the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that he was the incarnated Jesus, that Jesus was actually the physical form of Michael the archangel. So technically the Jehovah's Witnesses worship him. So anyway, the point is, these are angels. We don't know exactly who they are, but we know that this is their job to blow these trumpets, at least in this sense. 3. Then I'm going to fly through the next couple of verses. Then another angel having a golden censer came for the altar. And so he was an angel is given some incense, and they offered before the prayers of the saints. And we know that this represents prayer. We see in the Old Testament that God considers prayers to be a sweet incense before him. He loves our prayers. And the smoke of the incense and the prayers ascended before God and the angels. And so what are these prayers? Well, if you look at what's about to happen, I believe that these are the prayers of the saints asking God to do this. And in my opinion, if this is taking back the earth, saints have been praying that forever since Adam first fell. We've been wanting Jesus to come back and take the earth, to take possession of it. And so these prayers, I believe those are the prayers that are before God. And then he when he takes this censer, and which is full of the prayers, and casts it to the earth, there are noises, lightnings, thunders, and an earthquake. I believe these are literally happening. I think this is an announcement. God is announcing, okay, time's up. The earth is mine. I'm taking it back. And so I think the world is going to hear these noises. And I think those noises are probably maybe the prayers. The world may be hearing the collective prayers of the saints that God has been hearing. And that's going to be frightening to them. And of course, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquakes. I think these are happening in heaven, but I think they may also be experienced on the earth. Okay, so verse 6. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound. Okay, so let's get into what happens when these angels sound their trumpets. Okay, so the first trumpet blows, and you have hail and fire mingled with blood. So people probably don't have any problem generally with the hail part. Hail, we see hail all the time. It's a normal part of the weather patterns. Fire, probably doesn't throw people too much. Fire coming out from heaven, that's not without precedent. It's not the greatest thing in the world to happen, but we can kind of picture that. But it's when you mingle it with the blood. Okay, now that's kind of way out there, and people start to freak out a little bit and have to want to allegorize things or modernize things. Well, this can't be literal. This can't really be happening because it doesn't make sense to our non-supernatural eyes. So I've heard commentators say that, what John is really seeing are missiles. He's seeing nuclear missiles raining down at some type of nuclear exchange. They look like hail because, when their missiles are firing, the exhaust is kind of white. The propulsion is white coming out of and if it rains coming out of the back, and if it rains down, it may look like hail to him. And nuclear explosions would explain how all the grass is burned up and how a third of the trees are burned up. Okay. And of course, then being mingled with blood is, it means that people are going to be dying. So that it's going to be a bloody exchange. Nuclear war is devastating. Sure. Well, I guess it makes sense in some way in that, if there was nuclear exchange, sure. I mean, the heat would definitely burn up a lot of the vegetation, but they're kind of trying to have it both ways. You can't make this literal and allegorical. You can't say that there's literal missiles falling down but the blood is symbolic. You're kind of cheating. You're trying to have it both ways. And also, it doesn't make sense from just a reasonable standpoint. We're looking at what John has written. Look, John is not an idiot. John has seen hail. He had seen hail before. Hail does not look like missiles. I've seen missiles being fired, and I've seen hail. They don't look anything alike, and John would not confuse the two. He's an intelligent man. Give him the benefit of the doubt there. Give him some credit. What is happening here is what's literally happening. There is hail and fire mingled with blood. All 3 of those things are coming down at the same time. Why? Because it's supernatural. I think this is God making sure you understand this is not a natural event. This is not something that men are doing. This is not warfare. This is not ammunition or bombs or missiles or anything else. This is hail. This is fire. This is blood coming down. Just take it for what it's worth. If God could speak the world into existence, he can make hail, fire, and blood come down. I mean, if God can raise people from the dead, he can make hail, fire, and blood come down. Stop limiting God's ability to do the supernatural. That's actually insulting to him. He can speak things into existence, and this is what he's doing at this point. And so, other people try to they try to make it softer, they allegorize and say, well, this doesn't mean that all the grass is really burned up, because they'll pull out some verse in the Old Testament where people or other things are compared to grass, or maybe the grass means abundance, and maybe this means that something happens that will affect the abundance of the earth. And trees are sometimes an idiom for people and human leaders, so maybe he's saying that leaders are being affected. Folks, don't do a bunch of exegetical gymnastics. Just take the Bible for what it says. We talked about Occam's razor in some of the introductory passages in the first few episodes of Revelation Unveiled. We talk about something called Occam's razor. It is a philosophical mandate that basically says that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. So instead of twisting and turning and trying to make the Bible fit your various theories and your various beliefs, just read it for what it says. Fire, blood, and hail is coming down. Okay? That's what's happening. So what's the effect? All green grass is burned up. Well, that's going to be really, in a third of the trees. This is going to be devastating for a couple reasons. First of all, it's going to be a lot of fires. I happen to live in an area that experiences seasonal brush fires, and they can be devastating. We've had some happen in the last few years that just, destroyed a lot of homes and businesses, and they were, really scary stuff. Well, this is going to be happening worldwide. Again, I don't believe this is regional. When he says all green grass, I think John knows the difference between all and some. And for those who believe this is regional, remember that John is not seeing this from the vantage point of earth. John has been called to heaven. Remember, in Revelation chapter 4, he is in heaven. He's seeing the whole earth. He isn't just he's not seeing this from the vantage point of Patmos. He is in heaven now. He can see all of the earth. When he says all green grass, I think he means all green grass. So all the grass is burned up. So we're talking a worldwide brush fire. We're talking about any area that is around any grassy areas. Around any any grassy areas are going to be burned up. That means houses are going to be destroyed. Businesses are going to be destroyed. Fire, raging forest fire going out of control will really devastate not just the wildlife, not just the fauna, but it's going to destroy property. You can have billions, probably trillions of dollars of property damage happening from all these fires burning. There aren't enough firefighters in the world to contain this. As I said, I live in an area where sometimes wildfires go out of control, and when they fly in firefighters from around the country, and they still will burn for days, for weeks. So, and this is just regional. And if this is worldwide, this is not going to be contained until it burns itself out. And as to why a third of the trees are burned, well, trees are tougher to burn down than grass and brush. And I've seen some of the after effects of wildfires in my area, and yes, so all the low vegetation, trees and shrubs will be burned up. But shrubs and grass will be burned up, but trees, may be scorched, but they probably won't be burned up. So it makes sense that, there'll be 2/3 of the trees will survive. So we're going to have trillions of dollars of fire damage and property damage. And so it's not just going to be grass. I think it's going to be basically any low-lying plant life. So that includes crops. So we're going to have some serious issues with food supply. Not only vegetation food supplies, but also meat, because without any green grass, the animals that eat grass to survive are going to die. Cows, sheep, goats, pigs who eat corn, and corn is technically a grass. And I think that all those crops are going to be burned up, and these animals won't have anything to eat, meaning that things that eat animals, including us human beings, will not have food. We won't have vegetables. We won't have meat. And if you take it to the wildlife, you have animals like deer and bison and all elephants in Africa. They all eat grass. They're going to die off. There'll be nothing for them to eat. And so the animals that are predators to them, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and jackals and all the other animals that are carnivores, they won't have anything to eat. You're going to have massive livestock die off. You're going to have massive animal die off. And it's going to be unsanitary because they're just going to, they're going to die and decompose. Human beings are going to be starving to death. This is going to be some serious, serious problems here with all that vegetation being burned up. Oh, which, by the way, brings me to a point I did not bring up in the introduction, and that is a question of how long do these plagues last. So let's take a step back and let me answer that question. If you read certain commentators and certain books, for example, the Left Behind series, which was an entertaining read, but I think it had some serious errors in it. They made it seem like if you read those books, these plagues will happen and then they're like gone in a few days and things are back to normal. That's not going to happen, folks. I can't tell you how long the hell, fire, and blood storm is going to last, but I will tell you the after effects will not be recovered from quickly. Yes, grass can regrow. Probably in the next rainy season, you'll have new grass growing up, but it's going to take probably about a year. And within that time, again, it's going to devastate the earth. And we'll see when oceans are turned to blood. I don't believe that blood's just going to disappear in a couple of days. I think it'll still be there. It'll be lingering on. And we'll talk about that more as we get to them. So I said that these trumpet blasts are taking down strongholds. So what stronghold is going to be affected by the this destruction? Well, it's going to be Satan's control of terrestrial provision and economy. Remember, Satan has spent the last 3.5 years, if you believe that this is happening in the first half of the tribulation. He spent all this time convincing the world that he is God. He's the master of the world's economy, provision, and sustenance. But the first trumpet will permanently cripple the economy and food chain. Permanently. I mean, it's going to take more than 7 years for the world to recover from this. Again, the mass die-off and the starving food animals and vegetation will be a worldwide famine, even worse than the famine that he perpetrated with the black and pale horse. Billions will be left homeless due to their homes and businesses being destroyed. Millions of tons of smoke and soot will pollute the air, blocking out the sun and severely lowering the planet's temperature. Now, if you believe in climate change, man-made climate change, then you know what's happening now is nothing compared to what will happen when the smoke and soot of tons and tons of vegetation being burned up. It'll change weather patterns. It'll cause a spread of sickness and disease because, again, with the less sunlight and the not having enough vitamin D is going to affect the immune system. Yeah, it's going to be really terrible. So the inhabitants of the earth will call upon their new gods to help them. Remember, they believe that Satan and his fallen angels are gods, and they'll say, "Help us," but they won't be able to do anything because, again, they're impotent before the power of God. So this will break that stronghold of Satan's control over provision and economy. Okay, let's move on to the next trumpet. And when that trumpet sounds, you have something that looks like a great mountain burning with fire is cast into the sea, and a third of the sea becomes blood, destroying a third of all sea life and all sea vessels. Excuse me. So what do we have here? Something like a great mountain burning with fire. Okay, this is a simile. John is not saying that a literal great mountain burning with fire. He says something that looks like it. So we can actually see this as something symbolic or something that John doesn't fully understand. This could actually be a meteor or asteroid because it's likely that John has not seen that happen before, because when something that size comes into the Earth's atmosphere, it's pretty devastating, and there's no record of anything like that happening during John's time. So this may be him seeing what a meteor or asteroid hitting the earth for the first time. So that's possibly what it is. People who want to allegorize this say that mountains represent kingdoms and countries and continents. Okay, and we will see that later on in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, where mountains are again seen as kingdoms. But that just doesn't make sense. You really have to allegorize the heck out of it. And why would a kingdom be cast into the sea, turn the sea into blood? Well, you have to allegorize the blood, you have to allegorize the sea, you have to allegorize sea life. I don't like that much allegory. I'm going to assume that this is actually a big rock burning with fire. It could be supernatural, or it could be an actual meteor. In any case, it's cast into the sea, and a third of the sea becomes blood. I believe this is literal blood. Now, some folks who are on the modernistic kick will say, well, what John is really seeing here. I love people say, no, what's really happening, because you're so much smarter than the people who wrote the Bible. What's really happening here is that John is seeing an oil spill. I've heard this, that this is what's happening here is there is, again, the large mountain burning with fire is warfare. It's a missile hits the Persian Gulf, and there's a huge oil spill. It spills into the Straits of Hormuz and into the Persian Gulf, and now there's oil spills everywhere. Well, and so that's what John is seeing, because looking at oil floating on top of the ocean, he probably thought it was blood. Well, a few problems with that. First of all, a nuclear missile does not look like a mountain. It just doesn't. They're not that big. Secondly, John may not have seen oil. I will totally grant you that John probably has not seen an oil spill, but John has seen blood. And he probably knows what blood looks like. Oil floats on top of the water. And it has sort of, when light refracts on it, it has a kind of that little rainbow thing happening you see when you put oil on top of water. Blood and oil do not look the same. John knows the difference. John is intelligent. This is blood. Because there's precedent for this. God has turned waters into blood before during the plagues of the Exodus. This is blood. A third of the sea becomes blood. Now the question is, which third? Is it just a third of the sea even? Oh, and some people, the regionalized people, will say, well, when John says sea, he means the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, that's possible. John does not specify which sea it is. It could be the Mediterranean. But a third of it becoming blood. Again, the Mediterranean is a significant body of water, but not so much that it would affect the world. I think he's talking about all the oceans of the world. Could be wrong here, but that's what I'm going to go with. And if they become blood, so is it a third? Is it a third of the area? Is it just the? It could now here's where it could be regional. It could just be a third of the oceans that are around the Middle East and Eurasia, possibly. Or it could be as a third of the sea evenly spread all over the world. Don't know. No matter which one, though, it's going to be devastating, whether it's a regional third or whether the third is just spread out all over the world. But a third of sea life is going to die, and a third of sea vessels, which is why I believe it's around the world, because a third of sea vessels aren't in the Mediterranean. They're all over the world. So I think it's going to be a worldwide thing, and it's going to destroy a third of those vessels. So what are the results of this? It's going to have a terrible effect on the economy and food supply again, but this time on the maritime level. The portion of the world commerce that relies on ocean shipping, which is enormous, will be severely disrupted. And the portion of the food supply, which is based on sea life, which is also enormous, will suffer. Our seafood there's going to be a serious shortage of seafood. Now you have a shortage of land food from the first plague. Now you're going to have a shortage of seafood. You're not going to have as much. You're going to lose a third of all the fish in the world. That is just going to be insane. Plus, not to mention the horrific psychological effects of billions of gallons of blood in the ocean. I mean, can you imagine what people are going to be thinking when they go to the beach and there's blood? I mean, blood's pretty disgusting once it's out of the body, all washing on shore. That's horrifying. And by the way, what does this blood represent? Why is there blood in both of these plagues? I think that blood represents the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs. We're going to see that happen again, or see this again in the bowls of wrath, where they actually basically say, an angel says specifically, this blood, you spill the blood of the saints, and now we're giving you blood back. So that's what this is about. And I also believe it has to do with life. Life is in the blood. We talked about this in earlier podcasts and blog posts. Life is in the blood. Satan is now claiming to be the source of life, and I think this is going to just show that he's not. Like I said, some commentators try to minimize the effect by saying it's only in the Mediterranean Sea, and while I can't refute it, I just don't think it makes much logical sense to just limit this trumpet to this tiny section of the earth, while the rest of them seem to affect the whole earth. So, more off the strongholds. What strongholds do this affect? Well, again, this trumpet continues to destroy the false belief that Satan is God, the God he claims to be. This breaks his control of maritime provision and the economy. As I said, this is going to really devastate. This is going to completely devastate everything that has to do with the ocean. So Satan has no power over land, and he has no power over the sea. So basically, this shakes his power over the entire. This shakes the belief that he has power over the entire earth. Both the earth and the seas is shown that is demonstrated here is showing that Satan has no control, and they can't do anything about it. He cannot stop these plagues. He does not have the power. He is powerless to stop it. And so people will start to no longer believe that Satan and these fallen angels are as powerful or the gods they claim to be. All right, third trumpet. Okay, the third trumpet heralds the falling of a star called wormwood that lands on a third of the freshwater sources, essentially poisoning them so they kill anyone who drinks them. Okay, so this is not a literal star. This is a place where I will go with the not the allegorical folks, but the folks who don't take this completely literally, because we just know it doesn't make sense. A literal star is millions of times the size of the earth. We talked about this before for Revelation 6, where the stars fall from heaven. Those are not literal stars. They are symbolic of angelic beings. And also, this star has a name, and it only falls on rivers and springs. This is not a celestial object. This is an intentional spiritual event. Okay, so the first two trumpets will greatly affect food, while this trumpet will devastate the supply of fresh drinking water. So this angelic being is called wormwood, and it just falls on fresh water. So it's a spiritual. Now, whether it's a good or a bad angel, I don't know. I'm going to assume that it's a fallen angel because, again, it falls from heaven. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that, because when again, the Bible wasn't written in English. So as we see the word fall, and it doesn't necessarily mean fall in a bad way. It could just mean an angel has come down named wormwood. But the reason I think it's probably not a good angel is because it has the name wormwood, which means bitterness. And I would guess that a holy angel is not named bitterness. It could just be a fallen angel that God is using for these purposes. Or it could be just, a fallen angel who has animosity towards mankind. We're going to see more of that next week when things get really. You think things were weird with these first four trumpets? Wait till we get to the next two. And in this case, we will see that there are angels who have serious animosity towards man for some pretty interesting reasons that we'll get into next week, and they want to punish man. So God could be using this angel to basically poison man. So let's move on. Okay, so what will the effect of this be? Well, again, this trumpet will devastate the supply of fresh drinking water. And while human beings can survive for weeks without food, although we don't want to, we can only survive for a few days without water. So with a third of fresh water rendered undrinkable, many people will die due to thirst and hydration. And again, I don't know if this is going to be limited to a third of the earth, like a portion, like, let's say Africa is like a third of the size of the earth. Or you could say that, Eurasia, Russia and China and the Middle East and India may be a third of the earth. I don't think so, because the Bible doesn't specify that. So I just think a third general. I think it'll be spread around the world, that just a third of water in general, because I think it would be kind of unjust just to make it a certain section of the earth. I think that the whole earth has fallen. The whole earth belongs to Jesus, so the whole earth will be affected. So again, with the third of the fresh water rendered undrinkable, many will die of thirst and dehydration, and people will just get desperate and start drinking the water, and they'll just die because the water is poisoned. Oh, and as an aside, there was a fervor in the 1980s when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred in the Soviet Union. For those of you who were not alive during the 80s, if I have some younger listeners, it's interesting that you have to look it up, Google it. The nuclear waste poisoned much of the land from Chernobyl, and the land in the area was made radioactive. The land and the water were radioactive for many years. And many Christians were greatly concerned that this had prophetic implications, because the Russian word Chernobyl, the name of the nuclear power plant, is the Russian word for wormwood. So I think it's interesting. It obviously wasn't the wormwood, because it happened in the 80s and the tribulation hasn't happened yet. So I think it's probably a coincidence, or I think it's coincidence, and it might be like a prophetic pattern, just kind of giving people a warning. So the stronghold broken is, again, Satan's identity as the source of life. Okay, the first true trump is destroyed to believe that Satan has control over the earth and over provision. This will destroy Satan's identity as a source of life, because God is the source of life. Jesus is called the living water multiple times in the Bible. It's synonymous. Living water is synonymous with life. With fresh water devastated, the strongholds of belief that Satan as a life-giving God will be destroyed. So Satan is just losing all of his false belief powers here. Okay, the fourth and last trumpet. So when the fourth trumpet is blown, a third of the sources of natural light, the sun, the moon, and the stars, are darkened. And the Bible says that a third of the day and night will be without light. So if we take that literally, which I see no reason not to, it means 8 hours of our day and night are totally without light. So this means that this doesn't mean it's going to be difficult to see. It means we won't be able to see at all. So the light will not shine. It's not like, because some people say, well, a third means that the sun's going to be a third less, so it'll just look like sunset all day. Nope, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that a third of the day in hours is going to be gone. It's just going to be darkness, just like it was in Egypt during the plague of the darkness. So not only will this be psychologically harmful, because by the way, lack of sunlight causes deep depression, and just add this depression along to the depression and anxiety and fear and panic that will have occurred with the previous trumpets, with water turning to blood and green and grass being burned up and wildfires and wormwood, all that. People are going to be freaked out, but now they're going to not have light for a significant chunk of the day. There's just going to be, the psychological effects are just going to be devastating. And it also it's going to harm whichever plants and animals that are left. Whichever plants happen to live through the first plague of being burned up, well, they're going to die because they need the light of the sun to grow. They need it for photosynthesis. They need the moon to navigate and breed and perform other functions. So animals who rely on the moonlight to guide them, and birds use it, the moon and the sun, to guide them, and so the animals are just going to be completely messed up by this, and so are people going to be messed up. The animals are going to be messed up. And so how does this darkening happen? Well, some commentators attribute it to the dust and the soot in the air from the fires and the cosmic collisions of the previous trumpets. But again, like I said, that would only dim the light from the sun. It wouldn't completely eliminate it for 8 hours only. So I think, like the other two trumpets, these effects are intentional and supernatural. This is God darkening the sun and moon like he did during the Exodus. And again, these are a couple of the reasons, these similarities to the Exodus of the hail and the water turning to blood and the celestial bodies being darkened. This is why people like Michael Heiser say that these are a repeat of the plagues of Egypt. Again, I don't think so, because first of all, there are 7 trumpets here and there are 10 plagues, and these are the only ones that are similar. The rest of them are very different. So again, that's my opinion there. So what stronghold is broken? Oh, this is a big one. The stronghold that is broken here is Satan's identity as the light bearer. I think it's called, I'm gonna totally butcher the Hebrew here. Shakar bin Halal, or maybe it's Halal bin Shakar, one of the two. So it's Satan, Lucifer, son of the dawn, Halal bin Shakar. Or Shakar bin Halal. Anyway, Lucifer is the light bearer. That's been his identity his entire existence. When you look at people who worship Satan, they worship him as the light bearer, as the source of light. The Illuminati of the conspiracy theory world, which I happen to be a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and there are people who can call themselves the Illuminati, but they call themselves the illumined ones. They are the ones who have the light of Lucifer, the wisdom of Lucifer. They are Luciferians. That has been Satan's identity from the beginning, is the light bearer. Well, now he's no longer that person. Now there's darkness in the world, and there's nothing the so-called light bearer can do about it. Because you have to figure he's going to call himself that during the tribulation. He's going to say, I am the bringer of light. I'm the light of the world, as opposed to Jesus, who was the true light of the world. Satan will position himself as a light of the world, but now you have this plague of darkness that, again, he is impotent to do anything about. So if he was the true light of the world, surely he could extinguish this darkness brought upon the world by the evil God of the Bible. Well, he can't, which again shows that he is not the source of light. He is not more powerful than God. He is not the true God. He does not control God, and that's going to, again, break that stronghold. People are going to be seriously doubting their belief in Satan, and that's another stronghold that's going to come down. Okay, so those are the first 4 trumpets. But it's going to get worse, because when we see these things happening, after these things happening, we look at what the angel proclaims. Well, before I get to that, I just want to emphasize again about how long these trumpets last, these trumpet blasts last. So, and again, I want to use the logic and the Bible to show that these effects will not be short-lived. Again, so it looks like, the first trumpet event seems like the first trumpet blast seems like a quick event, in that vegetation is burned up immediately, and it'll probably stop after that. But the events we felt throughout the rest of the tribulation, as I said before, grass is resilient. It'll start growing again after the next rainy season, although the lack of light and fresh water from trumpets 3 and 4 will hamper this. But the soot in the air from the burning will take months or longer to clear. Also, trees, a third of the trees are burned up. Trees take years to grow, so they won't be back during this tribulation period. And there's no reason to believe the blood and the poison of the second trumpets will just disappear. So those effects will stick around. And it's not clear if the darkening of the sun and moon and stars is temporary, but so there's no reason to believe that they won't last until Armageddon. But here's the thing: when we get to the last few verses, the angel proclaims that as bad as the first four trumpets were, and they are horrible, as you can see, the angel basically says, you ain't seen nothing yet. He says, woe, woe, woe. And basically, woe means calamity. I mean, it's wailing, it's mourning. He's just saying, oh, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. He says, no matter how bad you think the first four trumpets were, the next three are going to be much worse. And that angel could not be more right. The next three trumpets are going to be horrible. The next two are going to, if there was any doubt in your mind that these events are supernatural, those doubts are going to be shattered with the fifth and sixth trumpet. There is no way, well, I would say there's no way to allegorize this or modernize this, but some commentators will give it a try, and we'll talk about that next week. But this is pure demonic, especially the sixth trumpet. There's no, you can't, allegorizing that, it takes some serious leaps of logic. But they're much worse in scope and in effect. And then the seventh trumpet leads into the seven bowls of wrath, which are going to be even worse than these. So in the next post, let's wrap this up. In the next post, we're going to look at the fifth and sixth trumpet, which are primarily spiritual and incredibly frightening. And the unbelievers who rejected God and took the mark of the beast, and which we'll talk about down the road a bit. But that's why I believe that these seven trumpets kind of overlap the midpoint of the tribulation where the mark of the beast is introduced. For these people who have rejected God, they will begin to realize what it truly means to be outside of God's spiritual protection in a very special way. Because in Revelation chapter 9, where these last two trumpets blasts happen, these next two trumpet blasts happen, they contain one of the areas in Revelation where I said I don't have an explanation, or not a satisfactory one. So it is one of those areas where I truly have to say, I don't know what this means. It is something that happens that's so strange, so weird, so inexplicable that even me, who is quick to come up with all kinds of crazy theories, I don't really have one that I can give credence. So I'll tell you what I think it means, but even my theories don't fit. So there we go. All right, we are way over time, so let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, and share. Please hit the like button, the subscribe button, the share button, the button, every button you can possibly hit to get this information out there. Please subscribe to faithbyreason.net by putting your email into the right navigation area so you can be alerted when new episodes are up. And yes, I know I need to update my website. I know. I'm really busy. I'm doing the best I can. So YouTube for now, and I will try to get the website faithbyreason.net updated as soon as I can. And I will talk to you next week when we look at the next two woes, the Revelation chapter 8 and the fifth and sixth trumpet, where things go from crazy to completely ludicrously insane. And I'll talk to you next week.